I want to talk to you today about a kind of piece of research I've been carrying out over the past year. But I also need to emphasize that the presentation is not a kind of a blue sky academic presentation which has absolutely no relevance to most of you who I believe are project management practitioners. The reason for that is that the presentation is based on empirical data, which is barely a year old. To try to link what I'm going to talk about to some of the previous presentations which we've sat on, I think two of them come to mind. One is Professor Binder, the NOTAP Director General, and one of the presentations I just sat in, I believe, by a gentleman called Tope, which I found quite interesting. I think I made a note of this, that Dr. Binder mentioned that we needed to get to a point where Nigeria started exporting things. My addition to that is that that is very possible, and we don't necessarily need to start looking out for a day when we are actually exporting cars or whatever. The reason is that there are other countries like China, like India, like Israel, which actually exports expertise. There is no university or research institute you're going to go to in the United States, you're not going to find some Indians, Chinese, and Israelis, and even Nigerians as well. I had the unfortunate experience of going to deliver a lecture in the Isle of Guernsey, which is a very remote island, also referred to as the Shetland Islands. And as they say, the popular saying, if you go somewhere and you don't find an Igbo person there, it's not worth living. And one of the ladies that was serving, I mean, it's just sheep. That's the only thing in Guernsey, was an Igbo girl. So I believe that we can actually do things and actually contribute without necessarily having to produce things like cars, etc., etc. I have an interest in culture, and having an interest in culture is not just about wearing, as I tried to do yesterday, very exotic clothes, but it's also because I've had the opportunity to travel. I've been lucky, not necessarily to make money, but to have the opportunity to go to a lot of different countries, especially uninvited speeches, and I've found that there are different ways of doing things. And that's why I've come to the conclusion that there is no real right way of doing something. It depends on the prevailing circumstances in that particular environment. Now, I'm going to give you an example by asking very, very quickly a quick question. Can you please tell me what you see? Cross? Is that what people see? Right. Okay. An addition sign. Okay, that's one of the few. A plus sign. Ladies and gentlemen, to some people that is a religious symbol, but there are different ways of actually looking at things. That can represent two lines which are crossed at the middle, could represent four lines which are joined in the middle. It can represent different things. And my argument, in terms of the research I've been doing, is that what you see is fundamentally shaped by your culture, the social environment within which you've come out from. That is basically what fundamentally shapes what you see. Just to take that forward, I'm going to ask this question again, and then we'll get in. There are two glasses here, and I do apologize for my English. English is my second language. It should have been, are these glasses half empty or half full? But are the glasses half empty? Are they half full? What do you think? Both, right, okay. That's right. And I think really what I'm trying to emphasize is that I think I listened to the senior police officer asking a question about project success, project failure. And I've listened over time to some definitions and what people have said. And I do accept what most people are saying. But I tend to try to go to the middle to say that sometimes there's a middle ground, which is quite gray, which I personally think could be the reason why things sometimes don't seem to work. But I think that culturally, maybe we want extremities, and we're going to see that when we look at the statistics and the data. Why do I have an interest in national culture? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's basically what we've got on the board. Irrespective of the number of Blackberries, Greenberries, iPhones, A-phones, G-phones you have, project management is about people. Studies and research have shown very clearly that up to 70% of projects that fail do not fail because of technical reasons. Okay? Most projects that fail because of human, reasons. And I'm not talking about mistakes or incompetence. I'm talking about basic things like a refusal to communicate. Information is power. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to quote a lot of, as we go along, I'm going to have to quote a lot of scholars. But there's a professor at the University of Hawaii who wrote a paper, and he described projects to represent, in effect, a battlefield. Okay? So what we do know is that those things that people who have been in combat will experience, like the fact that people are going to have information they don't want to share. The architect doesn't want to let the QS know something because he or she is afraid or concerned that once the quantity surveyor is aware of this information, they're going to have to start revising cost. So we have that represented on our projects. We also do know that human perceptions are highly influenced by cultural factors, and I'm going to give you in a few minutes some examples. Basically, culture represents a profound exhibition of what I've referred to as the social domain of humanity. I'm sorry, I know that I've upset a lot of people during the conference by disagreeing almost with everything people were saying, but I actually take a different dimension. I actually do believe that there is what is called a Nigerian culture. I actually believe that. And I'll tell you this very silly experience I always have. Because I don't have money, I always look for the cheapest flights. And anytime I wanted to come back home, I would fly from London to Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, sit at the airport for like 6 hours, and then get on the cheapest seat I could get coming back to Lagos. And when you go to Schiphol Airport, what you actually find is that if you get to these where people boarding flights for Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or whatever, you've got everything, armed dogs, armed police officers, army, and you get to the people boarding flights to go to the US, you've got everything, CIA, FBI, DEA. And when you get to the section for people trying to board a flight to come home, KLM never, apart from whatever is happening now, they only used to have one machine, a weighing machine, to weigh people's goods. And when you came there, I must say, I used to feel, there's this section at Schiphol, and when you come there, it's like Nigeria. Loud voices, flamboyant dressing, kids being spanked. Everything that to me represents home. And sometimes you sit there and you see people walking past, going to the boring places like Slovenia. Who wants to go to Slovenia? And you see them staring. And anytime you start coming towards that place, you feel, I'm coming home. And to me, I've not had the opportunity to go to Ghana or another African country, I must say, but to me, that strikes me like home. And I recognize that as Nigeria. This is what Nigeria is all about. Now, let's come back to project management. Why do I feel that we need to understand culture? Well, it's the last point. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not understand somebody's culture, you are very unlikely to understand how they're going to make decisions. I'm an Igbo guy. You could tell from my name. People say Igbos always make the decision thinking about how much money they are going to get. Yeah, that's the thing. But the reality is, if we take that, would I say, statement away, that is just the fact. It's the hard-nosed fact. People's culture influences the way they make decisions because people make decisions based on what they know or how they understand the world. And that's why we need to understand culture, which is why I disagreed with one, but I decided to shut up because I didn't want to get beaten up. I felt that it was important that we didn't try to, try to suppress what I regard as multiculturalism here. One of the great things about Nigeria is that Nigeria is a multicultural country. And it is exciting, believe me, because I know a lot of friends from places like Zimbabwe, and they tell me it's a boring, they have two tribes, Shonas and Ndebele. But here we have everything. So I think that that's why we need to understand culture. Now, I've been praying very silently that this doesn't play up, but, oh, right, okay. No. What's happened? Right, I'm going to move it forward again. Okay, let me tell you what I have found in terms of research, just going back to the bog standard research. What studies have told us is, and this is basically studies from what is referred to as services marketing, is that people from what is referred to as collectivist societies are less critical of failure but more enthusiastic about success. And when we talk about collectivist societies, we talk about societies like China, Thailand, in the Far East, where a sense of community is very high. And ladies and gentlemen, when I do put up the slides in terms of cultural dimensions, Nigeria has actually been identified as a country which is actually collectivist. We are a collectivist society. Okay? So it tells us, the theory, now I do have to apologize, this is theoretical, but the theory tells us that people from collectivist societies will not really criticize you so much when you fail, but will be more enthusiastic about your successes. It also tells us that people from collectivist societies are more likely than people from individualistic societies to associate the cause of an event to context. Now, what am I trying to say here? When we talk about cultural dimensions, and I'm going to bore you a little bit later on with the theory about that, it tells us that you can have societies which are individualistic, like the United States. If you have a problem in the United States, financial problems, you go see your bank manager. If your bank manager doesn't like you, you're probably going to have a bounty hunter after you to get the money. If you have a financial problem here, like I do, I go to my mom, right? And if she's not happy, she says, go to your cousin, go to Pius, don't disturb me, okay? So we have that, okay? The other thing is that, sorry, we know that people from collectivist societies look at the big picture. So the fact that a project has failed, we need to understand what were the prevailing circumstances. One of the presentations I sat in, the gentleman there's mentioned, and I don't know, that there was a government department that allocated 800 million naira to burials. And what? Sorry? Right, okay. Now, I'm not trying to say that that's right. I'm not trying to say that's right, but you can understand the kind of the thinking and the mentality. I'm not saying it's right. I need to emphasize this. What I said is, and even when I get to the end of my presentation, I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm only just trying to highlight the reality. Okay? Now, Theory also tells us that people from collectivist societies are more willing and prepared to take risk. We are prepared to take risk because we have a failure cushion. If it goes bad, we can go home. It is unfortunate, this is home, but you know, I know there's some senior police officers and some senior custom officers who would know better on this particular matter, but I have never watched TV when I'm watching the BBC and it said anything about refugees in Nigeria. But I know that there are people who have been displaced, because back home at my village, I have seen families who have had to come back from Jos. But we don't talk about that because our society enables us to kind of take care of each other. And what I'm trying to say here, I'm not trying to say that that's wrong. I'm just trying to say that that is a strength of this society. Now, let me just move forward on that. Can this work? Okay. Tawfiq, who I must thank very profusely for allowing me to come here. I contacted him when I came across this conference and I said, listen, I've done some great stuff and I'd like to come and tell people about it. In 2009, the PMI announced that he was going to sponsor some research on a global scale, and he asked scholars from around the world to write proposals, and you write a proposal, and what happens is that the Project Management Institute looks at the proposal, and if they think they like it, what they will do is they will pay about $45,000, not to me, unfortunately, because if they had, I would have completed my chieftaincy. As you see, I didn't have the feathers. I didn't get the feathers, so I still need to save up for that. So I've got the whole gear, but the feathers are still missing. That's another 5 million. So I was quite disappointed when the letter came and they said, yeah, Dr. Ojiako, blah, blah, blah. We're quite pleased to announce that you're a recipient of a 2009 research scholarship on behalf of the Project Management Institute, but the money would go to the University of Southampton. And I thought, here we go again. Okay, so what I did is I wrote this proposal and I told the PMI that I want to understand how national cultural differences, which I do know exist, influences the way we make decisions. And this was late 2009, and in 2010, I had a letter which told me that I was quite successful. Now, this is the reality about research. If I want to do a global study, I need to go around, I need to travel. But the reality was that I was in a very boring part of England in Southampton, which is, it just rains. That's all that happens there. But yet I was trying to get a study which was global. So what I tried to do, what I went out to do, was identify some countries and then begin simply by going to Google to try to contact academics in those countries to see if they were going to be interested in participating basically in terms of gathering data which I could use in the study. And I was able to do that. So the way I went about it is I got myself, and I work very closely with a Zambian friend of mine who also teaches at the University of Southampton, Max Chipulu. And I felt I was diving into an area of project management which I may not know very well, being that it is global, and I felt Professor Terry Williams, who is the Dean of the University of Hull Business School, is kind of the expert in global project management. So I approached him, and Dr. Stuart Maguire at the University of Sheffield, who is well known for systems. So I went around speaking to, there's some anomalies, because what we have in Dubai is, I must say, I went to somebody in Saudi Arabia, but he wasn't quite interested, a professor called Al-Mashari. So I went to the British University in Dubai, and I contacted Paul Gardner. And there's an Indian who now lives in America, Vital Anantamula, who I contacted in the United States. So that is basically the people I contacted, including, I must say, a professor at the University of Lagos, Peter Nwilo. So this was basically my core team. These were the guys and ladies who were going to provide me with the data to support the study. And now this has given up the ghost. Can you move it? Second? Systems failure. Where? There. Ah. No, sorry, I need to go back, I think. I don't know. Do I go back? Yeah, okay, sorry, I got it now. Okay. So what did I set out to do? Just to explain again, I've made the application for the research. I've got the money. Well, I didn't get the money. My university got the money. I've built the team. And basically, those were my two objectives. First, to understand the perceptions of project success and project failure over the project life cycle in terms of national cultural disposition, and to understand whether national culture influenced the way project management practitioners assign project failure, project success and project failure factors. Just a basic, very, very brief theory. Two major things I'd like to point out is the statements I've made about culture and management in terms of universal application. What we do know from research is that perceptions and decision-making is not culture-free. Okay, it's very important that we understand that. And the second point is that management application is not universalist. What I'm trying to say basically there is that the way we make decisions, for example, in the United States, might not necessarily pan out to be the way we make decisions here in, for example, in Nigeria. Now, using the dimensions of culture which I mentioned, this is a kind of a rough map of what the theory tells us. And what we can see in terms of West Africa is that we are rated to be actually a very collectivist society, which is something I'm going to highlight later on. In terms of the 7 countries which I looked at, again, we can see in terms of comparisons that Nigeria ranks almost, well, exactly with China in terms of its attitude towards, would I say, a community. So it's something else which I thought is important. And sorry, I just forgot something. It's also important that people look at our rankings in terms of uncertainty avoidance. What theory tells us is that Nigerians are kind of balanced in terms of uncertainty avoidance. In terms of the study, it was basically I used a mixed methodology. 41 interviews were carried out, 6 interviews in total across the countries. Unfortunately, 5 interviews in Thailand. And for those of you interested in the question of Nigeria, unfortunately, all the interviews and predominantly most of the questionnaires which were completed by Nigerians seem to have been from people in Lagos. And that is basically, would I say, a breakdown of the data which I obtained. Now, moving forward, this is a breakdown in terms of respondents by residents. And in total, I had 124 respondents from Nigeria. And the N equals to 100 means that all of the Nigerian respondents indicated that they were born in the country. So it was a kind of homogeneous Nigerian sample. What are the findings? The boring findings, unfortunately, came from the interviews. And the only thing really the interviews told me is that the respondents seem to acknowledge, for example, that that perceptions of project success and project failure may change over the project life cycle, but I'll address that in a minute. Sorry, I've been warned that I've only got 10 minutes to entertain you. I also found from the interviews that the respondents acknowledged some difficulties in terms of how they conceptualize project success and project failure, but I did not observe any particular surprises with factors which were likely to influence project success or project failure. From the questionnaires, this is the very interesting thing which I like to point out. Unfortunately, I'm challenged for height, but if you look at uncertainty avoidance, that is really what I like to talk about. What the data tells me in terms of project managers working in Nigeria is that, can you all see where Nigeria is circled there? Can you all see that? Right, it tells us that Nigerian project managers did not necessarily like risk, but it tells us they had a low index in terms of uncertainty avoidance, which basically means that Nigerian project managers seem to welcome a lot of uncertainty. I don't know what that means. My research hasn't gone that far yet. I will tell you what I think it may be, but I'm not quite definite in terms of the responses. So that's what basically the data told me, generally from the point of risk and uncertainty. So let me answer the two questions which I posed. Does national culture impact on the perceptions of project success and project life cycle of the project success and project failure of the project life cycle, and also in terms of the importance of those factors? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is what I found. If you look at this graph, and I do have to apologize, I just downloaded it straight from SAS 9.1, the country which popped out, apart from Thailand, was Nigeria. And what it told me is, if you look there, towards the top left-hand corner, it tells you that everything over that line is a very big influencer in terms of forming initial views about project success and project failure. So it is telling me that Nigerian project managers seem to form a view of project failure and project success quite quickly at the operational and decommissioning stage of the project. So the project is running, they've already formed a view that it's a failure or it's a success. Okay, the interesting thing is that when I looked at revising those views, they formed an opinion. Are they prepared to revise it even with new information? I found out that Nigerian project managers weren't quite prepared to do that. I don't know why. But that's basically what the data is telling me in terms of the analysis. Because what it does tell me here is that all the factors underneath that line imply that those factors were less likely to influence the revision of those perceptions. In terms of the influence of national culture on the importance, well, I'm afraid I didn't really find anything quite interesting to tell you there as of now. Basic national culture did not appear to significantly influence the importance assigned to individual factors. However, as I've highlighted in red, national culture and cultural exposure, in effect exposure to other cultures, significantly impacted in how those factors were assessed, which I believe most of you will feel is not surprising. Basically, what are my summary and conclusions? This is basically what I found. Nigerian project management practitioners in Nigeria did not seem to be keen to take risk. They showed a tendency for low uncertainty avoidance, so they seemed to thrive where, in effect, there was a lot of uncertainty. They were more likely than respondents from other countries sampled to form an early view of whether the project was a success or a failure, and they were less likely to ever revise those views. And what are the implications? Well, I had to write this in the morning at about 6 o'clock. And the reason I wrote this is I changed my conclusions because I didn't want to upset anybody. So I thought, I'm going to go for something which is quite neutral. but the interesting thing for me is the third point, where I've said that a tendency for low uncertainty avoidance shows the challenges associated, sorry, I have to use that word, regulation and control, and I don't like it. And I said that I am forming that opinion in terms of the implications based on what I'm aware happened with the UK in terms of the National Programme for IT, where they tried to regulate and control so much that the cost of the project escalated and eventually it was abandoned. Okay? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.